For this comparative study, we'll be asking the question, how is the cyberpunk subgenre depicted in two films from two different cultures? First, it is important to define what is cyberpunk. Cyberpunk is a science fiction subgenre developed in literary and film productions from the 1980s, predominantly from Ridley Scott's film Blade Runner and the novel Neuromancer by William Gibson. From these works, the foundation of the subgenre was established and expanded across the borders of countries. In the paradigm of cyberpunk films, the universal aesthetic conventions were created based on the idea of high-tech, low life, combined with neon reminiscent of the 1980s. However, in the case of themes depicted in cultures, is where they begin to diverge. Yet, there is one uniting factor, that they deal with postmodern issues of those societies.
Say that cyberpunk is postmodern science fiction.
By William Gibson. Hence, in this comparative study, we'll be looking at two films from the two cultures that have been influential on the paradigm of the subgenre, from the American and Japanese cultures. For the Americans, a key film in their contribution to the subgenre that will be examined in this comparative study is Ridley Scott's Blade Runner that was made in 1982. Despite being set in the future, the film's depiction of cyberpunk along thematic lines is driven by societal issues in the postmodern American society that were prevalent in the 1980s, such as the power of the corporations and late-stage capitalism. In 1980, American President Ronald Reagan issued a new economic reform that reduced government involvement in the economy. That included a tax cut of 25% and relaxing regulations on corporations. The goal of this new policy was to stimulate economic growth and job creation by giving the wealthy and the corporations more money to invest and more freedom to achieve those investments. Thus, this was known as trickle-down economics, since wealth would trickle down from the upper class down to lower classes. With this new interpretation of laissez-faire capitalism, which reduced government involvement in the economy, which led to anxieties in the American public of the corporations' power, and they becoming less and less accountable to the government to the point of where they become completely independent. In Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, the Tyrell Corporation embodies the American anxiety of corporate power that is unchecked. Firstly, we can see the depiction of Tyrell's sheer power and influence as symbolized with the size of their headquarters in Los Angeles. The building is a gigantic pyramid-like structure that towers over the rest of the city. That sheer size evokes a sense of power reminiscent of the ancient Egyptian pyramid. Secondly, the lack of corporate liability and independence from the American government is alluded in the main conflict of the film. The main character, Rick Deckard, is tasked to retire/kill a group of Nexus 6 androids that have gone rogue and have come to Earth. Tyrell Corporations were the creators of the Nexus 6 androids, which are essentially a slave labor force to support the human off-road colonies. This conflict shows a lack of corporate regulation, since they are not held responsible for the rogue androids, leaving the local government, aka Deckard, to clean up the mess. The second issue articulated in Blade Runner, thanks to the issue of corporate autonomy and 1980s Reaganomics, is late-stage capitalism, which can be defined in an article by The Atlantic as a catch-all phrase for the indignities and absurdities of our contemporary economy, with its yawning inequality in superpowered corporations and a shrinking middle class. One key proponent of this form of capitalism is pervasive nature of advertisements, which has also originated from the anxieties over the effects of Reagan's policies. The deregulation of corporations, it allowed them to have greater freedom on who they could advertise to, such as children. This anxiety pervasive advertisement is shown in Blade Runner with giant video screens advertising products such as Pan American, Japanese food, and Coca-Cola. Advert blimps beckoning the population of Los Angeles to migrate off-world, not to mention the street-side advertisements and neon, all with the goal of having their consumers buy their product. Yet, how does this all relate to the subgenre of cyberpunk? Well, one can determine this by looking at the technology and how it enables corporations to gain power with manufacturing androids, and how it allows pervasive advertisement all across the city. But it's a limiting point of view, since one can argue that advanced futuristic technology can make anything cyberpunk, and thus detracting from the ability to differentiate between anything else in the greater sci-fi genre. However, another appropriate way to view this is through the cultural depictions of cyberpunk, and revisiting the phrase of high-tech, low-life. Now, this can correlate with the implicit effects of late-stage capitalism, inequality, as Dr. Eldon Tyrell lounges in his luxurious Victorian suite, while the rest of the population of Los Angeles, including Deckard, live in squalid and decaying parts of the city, bustling to and fro to make meets end, while only to return home in cramped living spaces in an overcrowded city. This low life, along with the high tech that general public has access to, yet cannot advance due to the mega corporate monopolies and the income inequalities caused by them in their mission for profit. For Japanese cyberpunk, a key film that will be observed in this comparative study is Katsuro's Otomo's Akira. Made in 1988, it reveals the culture of a postmodern Japan, one still looking back on tradition and continuing, while also observing new problems that face their society. In the case of tradition, we see the continuation of a medieval tradition of Japanese apocalyptic fiction accentuated by nuclear warfare. Japanese apocalyptic fiction has started since the beginning with the Middle Ages, with the concept of Mappo, or forgetting of the Buddha's teaching and decline in Dharma, leading to an age of decadence and destruction. This pre-modern apocalyptic fiction would continue into Japanese society. However, post-modern Japanese society, with this apocalyptic fiction that is found in Akira, has become quite different thanks to the Second World War and the onset of nuclear warfare with the bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. This war's effect on Japanese society cannot be understated, since it led to a radical shift in post-war Japan from being a nationalistic, imperialistic military nation to a democratic republic that was neuter from any ability to fight. Allusions to the war and the post-war era can be seen in Akira, such as the opening sequence in 1988 Tokyo being destroyed by a massive nuclear-like explosion, with only a massive crater being left behind with the dying remains of the old city. As well as the climax of the film, with the godlike spirit of Akira transporting Tetsuo's mutated form to somewhere, possibly another plane of existence or dimension, yet it is ambiguous. This act of transportation creates a nuclear-like explosion, one similar to the one in the beginning of the film, that envelops Neo Tokyo, destroying it utterly. However, the destruction of the atomic bomb and its addition to Japanese apocalyptic fiction as a new interpretation, Akira brings something different in relation to this problem: the generation gap. With the onset of the 1980s, a generation gap was formed, in which a new generation came about with no personal memory of the bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. This new generation was defined as Shinjin Ryu, who grew up in a society of peace and stability, which led them to hold ideals of hyper-materialism and nihilism. This generation is characterized by Omoto, with the main character of Kaneda, Tetsuo, and the fellow members of their biker gang. Their nihilism is shown through destructive tendencies, with them fighting other biker gangs and rebelling against their own education for no regard of their own well-being, as well as fetishism for their bikes as important material possessions. Coming back to how this relates to cyberpunk, the low-life high-tech aesthetic convention, as well as late-stage capitalism that produces income inequality and degradation, is clearly shown in Akira. However, Otomo's Neo Tokyo, its city itself, embodies a pre-modern apocalyptic conception of Mappo, with the decadence thanks to materialism and the lack of dharma leading to violence and decay, only to all be ended with a cataclysmic explosion, which birthed postmodern Japan. Thus, Akira's depiction of cyberpunk along thematic lines is a reflection of postmodern Japanese society and what it is, a blend of the past and present. In conclusion, we can see that despite the united aesthetic and conventions that are present in cyberpunk as a subgenre across cultures, we do see a clear thematic difference due to cultural differentiation. The creators and the media audiences of certain cultures have different anxieties, traditions, and histories, which are manifested in the postmodern realities that they face.